Hey guys, what's up, listeners and viewers of the Strange Oddities podcast? I'm back live on Strange Oddities tonight. I hope everybody is watching because I have a great guest I'm going to introduce to everybody. Sorry for my green screen settings aren't working out too great tonight. Could be the solar storm that we're getting from the sun interfering with my equipment. Who knows? But if you see some glittery stuff, it's not your computer, it's my end. So anyway, long story short, last week I wasn't live. We have to reschedule Eric Shawn from Fox News, the anchor from Fox News, Fox Nation, and he does a lot of research and investigating into the Jimmy Hoffa story that we all, widely recognize over the years. Where is Jimmy Hoffa buried? But anyway, we're going to reschedule him. We had some conflict in scheduling, and we're going to have him on the show sometime around March or April. So no worries. He's going to be on the Strange Oddities podcast, and I'll let you guys know when that's going to be. So let's see. What else? Let's get the boring stuff out of the way, guys, as always. If you haven't subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's a little bell icon at the top of the main page of the YouTube channel. If you want to follow all news and guest announcements of Strange Oddities podcast, you want to follow us on Facebook. We go live both on Facebook and YouTube at the same time, and we also archive audio out to all your podcast outlets such as Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. That's where you're going to find it. So, guys, without further ado, it's been a couple weeks because I wasn't live last week, but we're live again this week. And I'm excited because I feel like a kid in a cookie jar because I love treasure hunting. I love watching all the treasure shows out there. You have Curse of Oak Island, you've got Gold Rush, you have, Treasure Quest was around for a little while on Discovery Channel. It's all TV and everything, but you have these real world famous, renowned treasure hunters like this gentleman that I'm going to introduce in a couple of seconds. I am real excited because he's going to tell us about all his findings. He's even going to show some pictures or some artifacts that he has from some of his endeavors over the years that he's discovered. And he'll get into a little bit of the history about that as well as how he got started. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Brent Brisben, the world-renowned treasure hunter. I'm going to bring him in here right now. Hopefully he's there when I bring him in. Brent, how you doing?
I'm great, Matthew. How are you, sir?
All right, good. So, sorry for all the glittery going on. So my settings are just like not working in my favor.
Quite all right. I was wondering how it was daytime there behind you, but now I figured it out. It's green screen. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, here we are. Brent, welcome to the show. I'm humbled.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Treasure hunting's hot. It's hot on TV. It's hot in the news. There's so many people out there that are into it now because of people like you who inspire everybody. You've been doing it for a number of years. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. How did you start?
Honestly, I fell ass backwards into it. In 2010, my father called me. I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, February. I'm watching it snow like it is tonight, ice storms, like everybody's going through. And my father calls me up, and he had this crazy proposition. He had been a follower of this particular treasure fleet. Got to know some of the people that were involved, and he called me in 2010 and he said, I'm thinking about buying this business. But the only way I'll do it is if you come down here and run it because I don't want to be involved. And I thought, treasure hunting in Florida? Yeah, I'll give that a shot. And very naively, we went headfirst into a full-blown treasure hunting operation that consists of a pretty big operation along the east coast of Florida, not knowing what we were getting ourselves into, not knowing any of the obstacles that are involved. And here I am 12 years later as a completely changed man. It literally changed my life.
Nice. What kind of things as far as what you've researched through your father's business and your business that was on your bucket list that you said, we had to go here and find this, and what things really stood out for you that you said that you wanted to go after personally?
It's kind of a fool's errand to try to say this is what we're going after, in particular, this certain artifact or this certain relic, because you just never know what you're going to find. You're just out there hunting and trying to come across whatever you can. So the situation that we got involved in was a really unique situation called the 1715 treasure fleet.
Right.
And the story of the 1715 treasure fleet is that there were 11 Spanish galleons that had gone down to South America and picked up all of this treasure for the King of Spain. 6 ships had gone to Mexico, 5 ships had gone down to South America, and they all reconvened in Havana, Cuba. And in the year 1715, they began to reprovision the boats to get ready to head home to Spain with all, just laden with treasure. And on July 24th of 1715, they set sail to head home to Spain. Well, 6 days later, on July 30th, the hurricane began to blow. And by 2 a.m. on the 31st, all 11 ships had gone down along the central east coast of Florida, from between basically Melbourne, Florida, and Stuart, Florida. That area is now known as the Treasure Coast. And so these wrecks had obviously been in existence for over 300 years, and
Right.
they were really first discovered in the late 1950s by a gentleman named Kip Wagner. And he was an interesting guy from somewhat close to me here in Ohio, and he was a painting contractor.
Hmm.
And he went down to this area of Florida to work on a hotel. And he just would walk the beaches at night as a pastime, and he started finding these little black discs that kind of looked like Oreo cookies. And he took them home and he started cleaning them up, and lo and behold, they were silver coins.
Oh, wow.
And he started asking some of the locals, hey, well, what is this? And they would say, people have been finding that stuff out there forever, And he thought, well, why hasn't anybody looked further? What's the origin of these things?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting story because in the 50s, there weren't really any metal detectors. And so he got himself a surplus army mine detector from the Korean War. Okay. And he went out there on these beaches and he began finding these artifacts. And eventually, after enough searching, he found a freshwater well. And he determined that because of the artifacts that were around that well, that had to be made by the survivors of this shipwreck. And so he knew that out in front of this was probably one of these wrecks. And he got himself a surfboard. He cut a little hole in that surfboard and put a window in it, and he began paddling around in the ocean. And lo and behold, after about a week, he saw cannons on the bottom of the ocean. And truly, modern day treasure hunting in Florida was born on that day. And these wrecks, there was a tremendous amount of research done after that from both the archives in Seville, Spain, and in Havana. And they were able to determine that this was a fleet of 11 ships, as I said, from Spain that went down on this hurricane in 1715. And that's really what started it. So these wrecks have been known about and salvaged for close to 50 years by the time I got into it. And so there really wasn't a tremendous amount of research to do. They had done a lot of that back in the day. And so my objective was to find, to create a better mousetrap, find, a better way to find this treasure. And that's what we set out to do.
Nice. Yeah, so I was going to say, so it wasn't the Bermuda Triangle that took down these ships. It was real weather that took them down.
It was a true hurricane, and it took out all 11 ships. And basically what happens is those ships are sailing along in the Gulf Coast out there, and the hurricane blew them in towards the beach. And once they hit that reef, which is only in about 25 feet of water, then the wave pounded these ships into thousands of pieces, and they floated for miles up and down the coast and all the way into the dune and up and over the dune. So this stuff is scattered. It's, a lot of people that I meet, they imagine that we dive down there and there's a little ship on its side and there's a skeleton at the wheel and there's a chest in there and you just swim in and get it. But these ships were utterly and completely destroyed. And so the artifacts have been spread out, and that's why there's the ability to still find things to this day.
Yeah. And with the storms that we have nowadays, from my understanding with modern day treasure hunters that go out into the ocean to find stuff, but a lot of the stuff is getting washed up on the shore because of all the storms that are dragging it back onto the shore, and people are finding stuff and they're getting new clues about certain ships and whatnot. So you guys been finding that these days, or?
Well, certainly people find particularly in the winter, this time of year, when the nor'easters hit Florida and it
Right.
erodes the beach. The beach is cuts
Yeah.
is what we call it. And
Right.
when the sand gets yanked away by these storms, that's when the beach hunters find this stuff. And they know right where my wreck sites are, and they certainly work up and down the beaches in front of them. And it's interesting because a few winters ago, someone found some artifacts a couple hundred miles north of where anybody thought that these ships were. And so we're of the belief that one of these missing ships is, potentially that far north, up towards St. Augustine. So, of the 11 ships that went down, only 6 have been positively identified.
Wow.
So, there's still 5 ships out there. And, that's kind of the eternal quest, is to find yourself a virgin shipwreck.
Sure, sure. What was your emotion when you guys came across all those coins that you discovered? Because I can't imagine the look on your faces when you came across all that, and you were just like, probably just like blown away. There's probably no words.
There is no words. It's a
Yeah,
it's a surreal feeling that,
yeah,
I had the great fortune to have, you know, I would say in the time that I've been doing it, 6 or 7 days where, things really changed for me,
right.
or where we found, the treasure that people want to hear about.
Yeah.
We would find things like, musket balls and pottery shards and ship spikes, on a
Hmm.
relatively fairly, daily basis. If you're a good crew and you know what you're doing, you're going to find artifacts from the shipwreck.
Sure.
But those artifacts don't pay any bills and they don't garner a whole lot of attention. So
Yeah.
when you really find some gold and silver, it's an amazing feeling. And
Yeah.
particularly in my case, the story is really bizarre in that I found, you know I, as I said before, the ships went down on July 30th and 31st of the year
Right.
1715. Well, on July 30th and 31st of 2015, exactly 300 years to the day that the ship sank in a hurricane, I found 350 gold coins worth $4.5 million on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
300 years to the day. And so
Wow.
that was really mind boggling. To
Sure.
say surreal
Little
really just doesn't do
little superstitious there.
it.
In
it
a way.
was it was an amazing situation, and I can't really articulate how that came to be. I just say that it was meant to be.
Right.
But it was, for it to come all to fruition at that point, because I had been doing it for 7 years at that point. I
Wow.
had, a tremendous amount of money invested, and
Sure.
I had, not a lot of treasure. I mean, we had found, treasure all along the way. And at that point, I probably had about $300,000 worth of treasure.
Oh,
But I
wow.
had over $1 million invested in this
Yeah.
operation. So I was pulling my hair out thinking I'm going bankrupt.
Right.
And when that happens and it changes everything, it was just incredible, because all along I'm getting in that treasure that I'd found at that point. I'm getting on the Today Show and Good Morning America, and people want to talk about it, and
Yeah.
everybody's like, "You're living the dream," and I'm like, "I'm going bankrupt." I mean, it's great to find this stuff, and it's a lot of fun, but
Yeah.
if you
But
can't cover your costs, it's a bad hobby, and that
sure.
and that's exactly what it was until July of 2015.
Nice. Nice. So, um, my question is, like, not more of a question, more of a statement, but want your thoughts on this, because people think that when you go diving into the ocean, that it's just okay. I'm gonna put on my scuba gear and I'm gonna try to find some stuff. It's not a it's like there's a lot more that goes into that. You have to pay for fuel. You got to pay for people that work on the boat. You have training to go through as far as how to go about scuba diving and going under the water and using the equipment you're using, the amount of research that goes into this, so I can't even like astronomically even think of a grasp a number of how much you were into it like before, finding all this stuff. And it's just gratifying when you find things.
It is. I mean,
Yeah.
it reaffirms your faith that you were doing the right thing all along. Because I
Yeah.
can honestly say, there's the old adage of, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and
Right.
expecting different results. And we would go
Yeah.
out there day after day and we would find beer cans and lead fishing sinkers and, spend all this money, as you said, on fuel, on boats, metal detectors, that we use underwater are not cheap, crew, you name it. And the
Yeah.
bills were, accumulating. And, when you go out there and you can really start to doubt yourself and question your own sanity, to be quite honest,
Yeah.
because it was, there's no guarantees in this. You just got to bust your butt. And I always
Yeah.
believed that I was smart enough, and if I worked hard enough, I could accomplish anything. But in this, it's just there's a element of luck that I can't really put my finger on, but it's there,
Yeah.
and it's a big variable in all
Yeah.
of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, to actually have it all come to fruition really was an amazing
Sure.
experience and feeling.
It's almost like playing the lotto, but like,
It is absolutely
obviously it's
like that.
costing a lot more than $1 to play.
That's correct. I
Right.
mean, we basically use the boats. We modify the boats. We build these large tubes that we call prop wash deflectors or mailboxes,
Hmm.
and they're big aluminum tubes that are mounted onto the back of the boat. You swing them down over the propeller, and
Yeah.
that way you can use the thrust of the propeller and the engines to
Right.
use that water to excavate the sand. And so we
Sure.
dust away the sand, and in the case where I found all my treasure, it was about 5 feet of sand. So it takes about a half an hour to dig a 20-foot wide hole. And you go down there and you can check that hole in 10 minutes and realize that there's nothing there. And then you've got to move over the width of that hole and try to methodically grid out an area and then hope tomorrow is better. So it's a process that a lot of people, they want to do, but they
Right.
don't necessarily have the ability to endure. I would get, tons of calls of people that would read about this on the internet. They say, I want to do it. I'm like, you don't have any idea what you're talking about, because they do feel like, what you were saying before, that you just scuba dive down there and,
Right.
there it is. And you pick it
Yeah.
up. And, really, I always joke, the only moment people think about is when they're coming out of the water with that gold coin in their hands.
Right.
And, there's a lot that leads up to that.
Sure. Exactly. So, and then the other thing I appreciate too, because I'm kind of a historian because of what I do. So I'm a paranormal investigator, and as a paranormal investigator, we do a lot of research with history. And as a historian, like sometimes the treasure that you guys find is not only the gold and the rich treasures, but the treasure themselves is finding the information and the data and the science and uh, maybe answering some mysteries about some of the history that you didn't know about particular wrecks or what they had on board or the people that were on them and all those stuff included. Like to me, that's also part of the treasure.
It really is. I mean, you experience everyday life on these ships because you're
Yeah.
finding everyday artifacts, whether it be silverware
Right.
or something as simple as these bronze navigational dividers that you see
Yeah.
here. Okay, the navigator would have plotted his course on his map with these
Yeah.
dividers, and these things sat under the ocean for close to 400 years, and they came up and they still work. And so when you find something like that,
That's
it's
so awesome.
it really is an amazing connection to everything that was part of that ship's life, from
Yeah.
the spikes that held the ship together to the musket balls that they fired in defense, cannonballs, cannons.
Yeah.
You really get to learn about everything that's involved in it. And so,
Yeah.
from an archaeological standpoint,
Right.
that is a neat part of it.
Yeah. And as far as the archaeological standpoint too, do you guys find that you run into some red tape as far as like um, government permits or
Red tape
all the
doesn't
red
begin
tape
to
that's
describe it.
involved, right? I
Yeah.
can't imagine
Well,
what you guys run into with that.
it's an interesting situation. I was fortunate in that my company, 1715 Fleet Queen's Jewels,
Hmm.
is the United States District Court's custodian for
Mm,
these shipwrecks. So we were appointed the custodianship, and that gives us basically the exclusive right to go out and search these wrecks.
mm,
But my predecessor, Mel Fisher, who is a truly world famous treasure hunter, he found a wreck called the Atocha in 1985 that had
right.
$400 million worth of Spanish treasure on it and became instantly world famous. Well,
Mhm.
my father and I purchased the rights to these shipwrecks from Mel Fisher's children.
Wow.
And so it was a really ugly battle when he went into federal court in 1979 to sue to get the rights to these shipwrecks. It's an archaic process that in maritime law, you go into court and you sue the shipwreck. Okay, you launch a lawsuit against certain unidentified shipwreck at such and such location, and then you put out public notice that anybody that's got a claim to this wreck needs to come forward and state their claim. Well, in 1979, the Spanish weren't looking at the Fort Pierce newspapers and they didn't really know anything about this case, but the state of Florida did. And the state of Florida intervened, and Mel Fisher and the state of Florida battled it out from 79 to 1983. And ultimately, there was a settlement agreement that was reached between Mel Fisher and the state of Florida. It's the Division of Historical Resources there in Florida. And basically, he agreed that we would donate 20% of what we find to the state of Florida to put in their museum, to study, to loan out to universities, different displays, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so we deal with the archaeologists in the Division of Historical Resources every year on these different things. And, to be quite honest, they view us as grave robbers. As an archaeologist, when you become an archaeologist, you sign on to a credo that, these artifacts are meant for the betterment of humanity. They're not to be sold or profited from.
Right.
So they view us, consider ourselves private sector salvage, basically as grave robbers. And so they did everything they could to put me out of business from day one. It was a fight that was one of the things that we were naive about when we got into, because they had lost a lot in 83 to Mel Fisher, and they saw this new guy and they thought, we're going to claw this back, and so they gave me the business every which way, even so much as to right up into 2015 when I found the treasure, they weren't going to issue my permits that season. They had decided that they didn't like this and they didn't like that. And thankfully, because I had this federal custodianship, I was able to tell them to pound sand. And we went out there and worked without these permits. And then, of course, after we found the treasure, they were very happy to send me those permits and get me to sign those so that they could get their 20% donation.
Right.
So, it really is
the other way after getting that.
Yeah. So, we donated over $700,000 worth of artifacts from that season.
Yeah.
And so, they should have been quite happy, but they really don't like it. Internationally, they get a very black eye from archaeologists because of our endeavors. There really is no other place in America that you can still do this. It's basically been outlawed, everywhere.
Right. I was going to say, what's the jurisdiction as far as being that this is still, I guess, on the side of the Florida coast, right?
Correct.
So the East Coast of Florida oversees that, but how far out would you have to go where it be, like, I guess, international law per se?
You would have to get out beyond 3 miles for international, and actually it's probably 7. It's 3 miles for state law and then 7 miles for international. So, thankfully, like I said, we have the custodianship from the United States District Court. So that's a federal mandate. It certainly supersedes the state of Florida, and was enabled me to go out there and continue to hunt when they were playing games with me. And so, basically our permits go out about 1.5 miles. Mel Fisher was able to they had to identify the ballast piles of these shipwrecks to say, this is the wreck, the center point of the wreck. And they would use those ballast points as a center point. And then they drew a radius that went about 1.5 miles north up the beach, out, and then 1.5 miles south down the beach. And so I have these arcs that, go from basically Sebastian, Florida, down to Fort Pierce, Florida, that cover these different shipwrecks. And so that's our permitted area. That's where we're allowed to work. And so that's how it works.
Green zone.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. But I'm glad we got into that a little bit, because I'm sure, like, that's another thing I want our viewers and listeners to know about, is that, you have all that stuff too involved. And, like, please, like, do your homework before you think you can just get right into it, because that's the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, it really is. It's basically become illegal anywhere, in the country to do this, particularly in the water, going out and looking for lost shipwrecks. I know a friend of mine, he spent a lot of money, $1 million to go look for a wreck. And he found one of the oldest wrecks in the New World. It was a French ship from an explorer named Ribaud. And he found it. He found these cannons. He documented photographs of the cannons. And all the while, the state of Florida, it's interesting. I'm probably going to get in trouble for this, but
Uh-oh.
what they do is they will issue you an exploratory permit so that you can go out and explore. You can spend your money to survey the bottom of the ocean, and you have to turn all those surveys into the state of Florida, and they get all that. But
Mm-hmm.
when you find that wreck, they theoretically could give you a salvage permit, but they will never, ever again give another salvage permit to a for-profit endeavor. They just
Right.
won't. Maybe a nonprofit, maybe a university can get a salvage permit, but there will never be another one for-profit, even though it is in the state of Florida's laws,
Yeah.
And so this gentleman went out, he did it. He found a virgin wreck. He documented it. He took it to the state of Florida. And what did they do? They gave it back to France.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, and it's sitting out there to this day, 5 years later with nothing being done to it. No one's looking, no one's digging up these cannons that he found or the monument that he discovered. They sit there and, continue to degrade under the ocean because, that's the way the archaeologists would rather have it.
Yeah. And the more they degrade, the harder it is going to look around and do your search, because it's been there for how long already.
Right. Yeah.
So, but well, before we maybe show some artifacts, because we had you had shown me a couple things before we went live.
Sure.
Before you show our listeners some of the stuff you've collected, what are some of the hardships or maybe some journeys or difficulties along your endeavors with treasure hunting? What has been some of the hardest things you've come across, other than the red tape, obviously, but for you, as far as your journey of finding those valuable coins that made your company very widely recognized across the world, what were some of those things that made it hard to get to that point? Probably a lot of things.
There are a lot of things.
Yeah.
And, the one that stands out the most was literally the single worst day of my life. One of my drivers drowned in 2013 in search of this treasure. Yeah, we were working on the same wreck site where I found all this gold in 15. It was 2 years earlier. We were out in a little bit deeper water. And no one really knows what happened. It was classified by the coroner as an accidental drowning. And we think what happened sometimes in diving, you have a shallow water blackout. And there was, without doubt, that was the single most difficult obstacle that I had to overcome. It really makes you question what it is you're doing there. And I had come to the conclusion, to be quite honest, that I was not willing to die for a gold coin. I'm not willing to give up my life for a gold coin, but I had given my father a commitment that I would see this thing through. And I really kind of came around to the fact that if I were to die in honor of that commitment, I'm okay with that.
Right.
And so, one of my guys quit, another couple guys, we ended up having a falling out, and I ended up having to let him go. And so it was a really kind of a tough time for me.
Sure.
And it was one that, I wasn't sure that I was going to overcome, but eventually we did get back to work. And, like I said, 2 years later, everything paid off in a big way.
Yeah.
So, that was the worst, but, even the people that are involved in this, we have what we call subcontractors, people like your audience that can come down and live the dream of doing this.
Right.
They've got to provide their own boat. They've got to provide their own crew, and then they can go out within our permitted areas and search for this treasure. But, honestly, one of the problems I have is, how do you trust these people? They fancy themselves as pirates. They'd slit their mother's throat for a pile of gold coins. So why are they find it and turn it into me? So, there's the weather, there's, just so many different variables that make it really hard.
One thing that I would be worried about is people that don't know what they're doing and then giving you a bad name because, you let them, go there, and, that reflects on you in a way.
I had a guy that, he had a boat that literally had plywood screwed to the bottom of it. It was an old Egg Harbor wooden boat that literally had sheets of plywood screwed to the bottom of it. And I was like, I can't let you do this anymore. I'm sorry. Broke his heart. He hates me to this day. If he's watching, he knows that he hates me. He threatened to break both my knees. I mean, it got that bad. But I just couldn't in good conscience let that boat go out there, because if it sinks on my wreck site, I've got Department of Environmental Protection permits, I've got Army Corps of Engineer dredge and fill permits.
Yeah, that's what I do.
And, if that thing goes down, I lose my business,
Right.
So yeah, you got to worry about what they're doing. Are they spilling diesel fuel into the water? All those different things that, you don't really think about till you're out there doing it every day.
Right,
That can
right.
become a real problem if it happens.
Yeah. You better have like a really good reputation
Yeah.
and have a lot of experience.
And not many treasure hunters have a good reputation, I'll be quite honest with you.
Right. Wow, that's crazy. But how about let's if you have a couple of things that you could show our listeners, would be great. Like you had that one grenade kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my favorite artifacts. Okay. So this is a
That's
hand
awesome.
grenade. And this thing weighs about 10 pounds, if you can believe that. And
Wow.
so, this was the wick. And so, that was filled with black powder. And some poor sucker would take this thing with a little wick. And can you imagine lighting a wick and holding this in your hand? And it's so
No,
heavy that I
I'd
can't
blow up
imagine.
with it.
Yeah, I honestly can't imagine being able to throw it far enough from me that I wouldn't be hit by the shrapnel.
I'd probably
And
throw out my
so,
shoulder.
yeah. So, this is, one of the really cool iron artifacts that we find. And we find, everything in the iron world, from the ship spikes to hand tools. I have here a crowbar, and it's
Wow,
amazing, how similar, some of
that's
the
a great
hand
shape
tools
too.
were.
Yeah,
Yeah. Here's a hatchet, that we found. And so, those are really neat artifacts.
yeah,
But then, it ranges all the way up to, something as simple as a silver buckle. Okay. This
that's cool.
buckle, was, used obviously by someone, and, to think about where it was, what was it on? Was it a belt? Was it a strap, that held
Yeah,
something? Really cool item,
yeah.
and then you get something like this, this is a little silver key. What did this go
Wow.
to? What was the box that this unlocked? What kind of jewelry box did some woman have that this little dainty little key was able
Yeah,
to unlock? So, you find different articles, of everyday life. But, obviously what everybody's looking for is the gold,
yeah,
And
right.
so in 2013, one of my subcontractors found 50 feet of gold chain. And I don't know
Wow.
if you can see, on here, these
Yeah,
links are really, really amazing. They're oval links that each one is folded over and into basically a C, and then the next link is folded in that same shape and put back through there.
right.
And so the gold chains are interesting. People ask, why was it so long and or so big? Like the one chain was 88 inches.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah, they did.
it,
They wore them really long back then. Yeah.
they wore them long, but really the main thing was there was a tax. Okay. So the reason that Mel Fisher in the state of Florida came up with a 20% donation, as I mentioned before, was
Hmm.
because back then there was a 20% tax on any gold and silver coming back from the New World to the king.
Right.
So, the only exemption was jewelry. So they would make these super long and elaborate gold chains, and then they would bring them back, not pay taxes on them, just like we don't want to pay taxes today. And then they would, melt them down or use them for whatever purpose. But so, we find some ornate gold chains, but really, at the end of the day, the thing that people really love more than anything are the coins,
Sure.
So here's a gold, this is called an 8 escudo, and
Nice.
this is an 8 real.
That's awesome.
Okay, so these are the different denominations that they had back then. Was these both weigh about an ounce?
Wow.
Okay, 27 grams or so should be the proper weight of these. And so these are eights. They're the largest size, largest denomination coin. And then they made a 4, which was a half of an ounce, a 2, which was a quarter of an ounce, and a 1, which was an eighth of an ounce.
Wow.
And so people love the coins. Both of these are dated. This silver coin is dated 1714. This coin was made in 1711 in Lima, Peru.
Wow.
And so, that's really, what
Yeah.
gets the headlines. That's what
Sure.
people want to see.
What's the
And
oldest coin that you've come across that you have?
I have a one escudo that was made in Lima, Peru as well from 1697.
Oh, wow.
And so that was probably the oldest coin that we found. And then we found them right up until 1715.
Yeah.
And then there weren't any obviously after that date, since that's when they
Yeah.
sailed and sank.
Yeah. You guys go to like like a university or like a company that carbon dates your finding? Do you have like a go-to organization that does that carbon dating or data analysis things for you?
No, we don't really need to carbon date these artifacts because we know where the ships
Okay.
are and when
Okay.
they went down, So, obviously this cannonball could have been, 10 years older or whatever, but the
Hmm.
coins are dated, the
Yeah.
chains, we know approximately, they were in the 1710s, this stuff was made.
Hmm.
So as far as that, we don't really need to try to
Sure.
super narrow down exactly when it came from.
Yeah. If you had a fleet or a ship that you haven't come across that you would love to explore that nobody's explored or not many have explored, is there a particular site that you would really want to get your hands on?
Finding any one of the missing ships, I spent a year doing that down south of where we thought most of these wrecks were. It was in an area called Jensen Beach. We had one of these exploratory permits that I had mentioned earlier. And sadly, we weren't able to, find any evidence of a shipwreck in the area. And so, really, that's kind of the holy grail. There's not any one specific ship that anybody's looking
Sure.
for, but to find a virgin wreck that no one's picked through, that no one's been on before, would kind of be the holy grail. And like with our, ships, there's a very famous legend about the Queen's jewels.
Mm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so King Philip V was the monarch of Spain at the time, and his wife died, and he married a woman named Elizabeth Farnese, and she was the Duchess of Parma, Italy. And so she demanded a dowry before she would consummate the marriage. Well, he ordered up all these jewels to be made down in South America and brought to him, and they were on one of our ships, and they've never been found. And this genesis of this story provided the basis for two movies in modern times. I don't know if you're old enough to remember in the 70s a movie called The Deep with Nick Nolte and Jacqueline Bisset. It's a treasure hunting movie.
Vaguely remember it.
Yeah, and if you go back and you watch that, they tend to talk all about the 1715 treasure fleet. They talk all about the Queen's dowry and Elizabeth Farnese, this whole story. And then more recently, you probably did see Fool's Gold with Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson.
Yep. Yep.
In the exact same scenario. What they're looking for in that movie is the Queen's dowry. And so, in the scene on Donald Sutherland's yacht when they're sitting in the salon, they talk all about the 1715 treasure fleet. They talk about Albin's dowry. So that, if you were going to talk about one kind of item, that's
Yeah.
the utopic kind of item that people look for, the holy grail in
Yeah.
this on our fleets. But yeah, ultimately it would be a virgin shipwreck that would be the most exciting thing.
Nice. What has been one of your most prized possessions that you've collected, or one of your most favorite pieces?
I've got a couple different things that I really like. These navigational dividers are really cool. As I said, that cannonball is cool. We found a bronze swivel gun,
Mm.
and it was a 3.5 foot bronze swivel gun. And it was only 17 days into me purchasing this business that we found this thing. And amazingly, there had been these stories about people hiding treasure inside of cannons. Okay, it's been a mythological legend amongst
Mm.
treasure hunters forever. Never been verified, never been proven. And in 2010, we found a 3.5 foot bronze swivel gun. And in the breech of it, in some incrustation, there were 50 gold coins and 40 silver reals.
Really? Wow.
And yeah, and so that was a pretty amazing experience. But, all of these things have an amazing tie to the past, but you can't really relate it to any one specific person.
Right. Right.
And in 2014, we found a really cool artifact that didn't come from the wrecks. We found a class ring, okay,
Mm.
from a high school in Norfolk, Virginia, in the class of 1972. And within a few hours, I was able to contact that high school, contact its alumni association, and find the owner of this ring living in Denver, Colorado.
Wow. That's
Okay. And
crazy.
this guy tells me a story about how he graduated from high school in 1972 and he moved to Miami, Florida. And in 1974, his apartment was robbed and that ring was stolen from him. And
Wow.
somehow it ended up 200 miles north on the bottom of the ocean, and we found it, and I was able to return this to him, and it brought back a flood of memories about how his mom was mad that he spent extra for the stone that was in the middle of it. And I mean,
That's
this guy was just
insane.
blown away. And so that was really cool to be
That
able to
is cool.
connect something like that. Was an amazing
Yeah.
experience.
What was he like? He probably was like beside himself.
He was completely beside himself. Like I said, he just couldn't believe it. When I told him, I could tell he was just like, "What? You found this on an ancient shipwreck?" And I'm like, "Well, obviously it wasn't on the shipwreck, but it was
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
vicinity.
We just
How it
came
got
across
there, I
this by
can't tell you."
accident.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
so he was really nice. He sent me $200 to give to the diver that found it as a reward, and he
nice,
was just truly elated.
nice.
Yeah.
Was the ring still in good shape, or?
Yeah, it was amazing. Gold shines forever. It's
Oh
a
yeah,
famous quote from Mel Fisher.
yeah,
And so it came up like the day it was made. It looked like, it had just been, laying down there with no problem, just like all of this gold that you see here. These coins, this coin I have around my neck, this coin here, they come out of the water looking like this. The
right,
silver, oxidizes and it turns black. So,
yeah,
like I referred to them as Oreo cookies before, this would have been all black and crusty. And we
true.
have to put it through a process called reverse electrolysis in
I was
order
gonna ask
to.
what the process was that you used to clean everything. Yeah,
Yeah, reverse electrolysis is the best way to, particularly when it comes to silver, and it's kind of like the process of chroming a bumper, except you run the current in the reverse order. So you have an anode at the bottom of a tank, you run electric into the coin, and
hmm,
then that anode draws that electrical current away. And what it does is it pulls the corrosion, it pulls the salts and the contaminants out of the metal so that it can be preserved and brought up and put into light. And it's the same way with the iron, because the iron really falls apart.
hmm,
It will flake off like layers of a biscuit if you don't preserve it. You don't think of a salt crystal as being having any real mass or anything, but
right,
that
right.
salt permeates this iron. And when
Wow,
it dries out, those salt crystals expand. And so this thing, had it not been treated, would just turn to dust after probably 5 years and being in the open
yeah,
air.
wow. And how old was the grenade that you found?
I would assume it's, 310 years old. It
Wow,
was it was
and
on one of these
be,
ships. So
being that it looks like that, I think that's amazing.
yeah, well, it comes out basically. I'll give you an idea.
Uh-huh.
This is an iron spike. Okay.
Right,
And this
right.
is what it looked like when it was, all encrusted when it comes out of the water. And then, here's one that's very similar that's
That
been
got
preserved. And so,
wow,
if, you have to, like, I
night
don't
and
know if you
day.
can see that there's a ballast stone back here and it's got a big iron spike that's encrusted to it.
Wow.
So, everything that comes out, it looks like a rock, and some
Yeah,
people would
yeah.
just stumble across it and not pay any attention to it. But,
Right.
when you've done it long enough, you got an eye. And one of the fun things that we used to do is when we would find iron artifacts, we would try to determine what they were, guess by looking at the incrustation in the rock
Sure.
to say, hey, this is what this is.
Yeah. Well, technology has really come a long way as far as underwater searching and um, the radar kind of technology that they use to find objects that are on the ground at the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
And I can't imagine how expensive it is to use some of that stuff when you go out there on your journey, and like I can't imagine what that costs.
It's not cheap at all.
Yeah,
And, I kept praying while I was going bankrupt that, someone would invent something that was a long range detector of precious metals. And
yeah,
one of the funny things about this business is I was inundated with crazy people that would have what we call black boxes. And they would come down and they had developed some technology and they could remote sense where there was gold and remote sense where there was silver. And
yeah.
we would have an 80-pound silver bar from the Atocha wreck that I mentioned
Right.
earlier. And I would take it out onto this ranch that we owned, and we had 2,000 acres, and I would go and bury it. I'd say, okay, if you can go find this thing, then I'll listen to you. And no one was ever able to find anything.
Right.
So that really doesn't exist. But the technology that does exist, that's the most beneficial for treasure hunting, is something called a magnetometer.
Hmm.
Okay, and so you drag this magnetometer through the ocean and it registers the Earth's natural magnetic signature. And if there's a piece of iron laying down there, it
Yeah.
throws that signature off. So we can detect iron from long range, but unfortunately, the gold, the silver, that sort of thing, you've got to have a small little metal detecting loop, and you've got to be waving it right over it in
Yeah.
order to find it.
Nice. Nice. Um, we believe it or not, we only have 15 minutes left in the show. I've been having so much fun. This conversation has been a blast. I want to make sure that I don't miss any questions or miss anything that I want to cover. Um,
Fire away.
yeah, no. What have been some of your most fun adventures that you have the most fond memory of that's been the most fun for you as far as your findings?
It was really, it's not so much any one artifact. It
Mm-hmm.
was the camaraderie amongst the guys.
Okay. Yeah.
When you go out there and beat your head against the wall day after day, there's a lot of strife. I mean, we're out there in the middle of the summer because we work so close to the beach. We can only get that close in the summertime because the
Right.
Atlantic Ocean will lay down like a lake on certain days, and we can get right up into the beach in order to find this stuff.
Right. Right.
And it is hot. It is miserable. And you're sucking diesel fumes all day. And tensions can get, tough. And
Yeah.
so, there are some days when, guys want to quit and guys want to punch the other guy. But, the bonding for life that happens when you
Sure.
go through something like that and then it ultimately pays off really was the best experience for me. It was to just, have that struggle with these guys. And then, once it all paid off, I've got a guy that, we found the vast majority of what we found value wise in 2015 were these coins called royals. So
Mm-hmm.
you'll see these coins are very crudely made. They're misshapen. They don't have all of the legend on them.
Yeah.
You know, but these royals were perfect specimens, perfectly round, and they were made specifically for the King of Spain himself.
Wow.
And I sold the cheapest one for $250,000, and the most
Wow.
expensive one for $425,000.
That's insane.
And one of my divers has one of those. That's what he wanted in his division, and he had enough, of points to get it. That's how we
Right.
basically accrue things, is by a point system. And so, he walks around to these crazy shows with all these, crazy people, at coin shows, pirates, and he's flashing a $300,000 coin around. But those kind of things are really what make it special. It's really about the experience with the other guys more so than any particular
Sure.
artifact.
Yeah, yeah, and gold coin and silver coin collecting has been a hot thing now.
It's
Uh,
getting really hot.
yeah, yeah, and I can't imagine the value of some of these things that are going for, especially the older ones. And what would if you could put an estimated number on how much one of the oldest coins that are sought after the most? What are those some of those coins that are what you guys go after?
It would be these royals. There were
Okay,
really only about 20 known to exist, in the world, and we found 10 of them in
right.
2015. And that really changed everything for me, and us as a crew. It was the sheer, like I said, the cheapest one I sold was for $250,000. Now I had to give two of them to the state of Florida to put in their museum,
Yeah,
but that was, as far as a coin goes, that's really the holy grail, is to
yeah,
find one of these royals.
right. Wow, that's cool. Awesome. Um, any future endeavors that you have coming up that you're working on? Any projects that you would like to share with our listeners and viewers, as far as events or things that people can watch you on, as far as TV shows, news, anything?
Well, I do a lot of public speaking. That's primarily what I do these days. I gave a TED talk after this, which was a really neat experience. They flew me to Munich, Germany to do that. They flew me to Japan to be on TV.
And
There's a 1 hour documentary on Amazon Prime right now called The Lost Treasure Fleet of 1715,
yeah,
where you can kind of get a little bit of history and some knowledge about these wrecks. Sadly, it was shot in 2014 in anticipation of the 300th anniversary in 2015.
mm,
And so it was all put together in basically a complete show. And then once we found all that treasure in 2015, they kind of shoehorned that in right at the very end, showing us
right.
finding all the gold. But it'll give you a really good, kind of synopsis of the history of the fleet, and you can really see what it is we do. They're live
Right.
on our boat, or they were live on our boat when they shot it, and you'll see everything from how we dig the hole to the metal detecting, and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, if there was any advice that you could give to people that are like me, that are big fans of treasure hunting, and if anybody wanted to go out and do it themselves, what kind of advice would you give those who want to learn and those who want to actually go out and do it?
It's really about metal detecting.
Yeah.
Become proficient with a metal detector. I would get calls from Navy SEALs, and they would say, I've been diving and this and that. And I said, listen, diving is not what we do. I will hire a expert metal detectorist and teach him to scuba dive
Right.
rather than try to do the reverse. Because, metal detectorists have a unique personality and they keep on that hunt. And when they're really good, they can tell the subtle differences of the tone of that machine, and they can, generally know what's down there. So, you know, become familiar with a metal detector. That's pretty much the most important thing. And, I probably shouldn't say this, but I would say keep your mouth shut. Everybody wants to take it away from you. Everybody wants to, get into your spot if you do find something, particularly if it's, a situation where a state entity or a governmental entity is involved. Like in the water, you really cannot do this anymore. It's not something that, you can go out and do today. And so, if you were to stumble upon something, and I'm not naive enough to think that people aren't out there looking, sadly, my best advice would be to just keep quiet about it, because it's, the odds are against you of actually getting it, finding it, and keeping it.
Right, right. Yeah, because like you said, you never know who's listening and who's watching, and especially the government. And if it's the government thing, you want to be very careful.
Yeah, you don't want to be in state parks, things like that. It's,
Yeah,
it's kind of verboten to do those sorts of things.
right.
It is illegal in the state of Florida. Actually, it's technically illegal to find anything over 50 years old. It's
Oh,
considered an
wow.
antiquity. And
Really?
so, that becomes illegal. And so, I know a guy that does some metal detecting trips on farms in the South, Civil War stuff, those
Right,
kind of
right.
things. If you get permission from the landowner, and it's a good idea to always offer the landowner maybe a little share of what you may
Sure.
find. But there are these areas where you can truly go out and find some really amazing historical artifacts. They may not be, 300-year-old gold coins, but Civil War artifacts and that sort of thing. And
Right.
they're all over. It's out there in the ground.
Yeah. No, what about like your average Joe who wants to like just go out and metal detect, um, and they don't want to keep things per se, but like knowing that it's on somebody's property, there's a lot of obviously laws and logistics you get into with that, but um, what would be the best thing they do? Like, what kind of detecting could they look into, learning to use, or is there any type of you know, um, equipment that you recommend?
We use a very specialized metal detector underwater. It's called an aqua pulse. It's a pulse induction detector, and it's really highly specified for what we do. Most of the guys that I know that hunt on land, they use mine labs. There's a few different types of metal detectors, but you want some discrimination. A lot of the newer detectors can discriminate out iron and certain
Yeah,
metals that
yeah.
you don't necessarily want to find, because you can be out there digging up nails all day long. So you want to try to maybe just look for the precious metals. But
Right.
ultimately, when it comes to going on land, if you think that you're down in the South or somewhere where there was a battle, talk to the homeowners. People generally are good. Be respectful, fill in the holes, that sort of thing. But offer
Yeah.
them, say, hey, I'm willing to share what we find, and
Yeah.
be honest with them. And more times than not, you'll find that people are fairly receptive and would like to, see what you find. So
Yeah, you
it'll
never
be
know.
encouraging.
Yeah. No, you never know. Absolutely. Where can people follow you? I know you have a website. Where can people check you out?
BrentBrisben.com is my site. Basically, it's mostly set up for me to do speaking engagements. That's something I do these days. Or on Facebook, you can look up 1715 Fleet Queens Jewels.
Nice.
That's the name of the company. That site, gives you a little bit more updated stuff. Like I said, we primarily only hunt in the summertime. So in the winter, it's about conservation. It's about, you got to not only to conserve all of these artifacts, to photograph and weigh all these artifacts, and get together a report for the state of Florida. So there's a lot of that goes on this
Indoor
time of
work.
year. But yeah, if you, particularly in the summertime, the Facebook page, or it's 1715treasurefleet.com is the web page, but there's not a whole lot of
Right.
information on there. Probably Facebook
Right.
would be best.
One question I do have before we end the
Sure.
conversation tonight. What I always wanted to know, now I've never like scuba dived or wore a wetsuit and wore gear to go deep in the ocean. How cold is the waters out there? Like when you're in certain temperatures in the ocean, like can you really feel the temperatures in those suits, or
Yeah, absolutely. It gets real cold. I mean, even along the beach, you don't even have to be in that deeper water. There are
Right.
certain times when they upwell, the deep water upwells because the winds are blowing. Ideally, we want west winds. That's what knocks all the waves down. But when the wind's blowing from the west, it pushes the top water out and it pulls the cool underwater in, and
Right.
it can get cold. So
Yeah.
we actually, my buddy Jonah improvised a situation where we would take and use the heat from the engines to heat water to actually have a little shower on the deck to be able to put hot water down the back of those wetsuits because you get in for 10, 20 minutes and you check the hole, but then you
Right.
got to come back out and sit outside the water for another 20 minutes while we dig the next hole. And
Yeah.
so Bill was our main diver in 15, and yeah, he definitely had some chattering teeth on some days. So
Yeah.
yeah, it can be tough. But there's some days when it's nice and warm, and you can just go down there in your shorts. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just it's all relative.
Yeah. Now, if they had technology where you could wear a suit and be warm like all the time, then you could do it all year round.
You could. They
Right?
do have dry suits. That is something. But you're getting into a whole other realm of
Oh,
diving
sure.
at that
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, but Brent, I had a great time tonight. I hope you did. I hope I was a great host for having you on.
Thank you, Matthew. I
Yeah.
appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no, as you can tell, I definitely did my homework before you came onto the show. I know a little bit about treasure hunting just from all the research I've been doing about Brent because I just really I admire what you do. I respect what you do, and like really, I'm so grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. I hope your fans enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
if they've got any questions, they can feel free to reach out to me at brentbrisben.com.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Brent, if you don't mind, just staying with me like a minute. We'll say our goodbyes after the show, and I'll, give a couple of things to my listeners and viewers, before we end the show here. So Brent, I'm gonna minimize you, and you're gonna still be with me, and then we'll say our goodbyes after, if that's all right.
Thank you, sir.
All right. All right. I'm gonna minimize him right now. So here we go. All right, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed Brent Brisben. It was a blast. I felt like I was in a university, learning about oceanography and treasure hunting in the ocean, and what better person to learn all this stuff from but other than a renowned world treasure hunter, Brent Brisben. And I just couldn't believe he was on the show. He was on Strange Oddities podcast. So, guys, I hope you really enjoyed our guest tonight. Again, Eric Sean will be a guest on Strange Oddities podcast. We'll probably have him in March or April or something like that. I will let everybody know when that's going to happen. Next week, I'm going to have Peter Moon. If anybody's heard of Peter Moon, he's an author. He's also a big researcher. If you ever watched the movie Philadelphia Experiment, and if you know about Montauk Project out here in Long Island, there's a lot of controversy about Montauk Project, about being involved with mind control and the government doing weird things, experimental stuff, and it kind of inspired the movie The Philadelphia Experiment. And it's a great movie. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. But we're gonna have Peter Moon next Thursday night here on the Strange Oddities podcast. So, guys, without further delay, I'm gonna end the show. Have a great night, everybody, and I wish everybody well. Have a great night.